We're reading from Living Wisely, Living Well. The topic is standing firm and centered in yourself. For August 31st, no calamity will shake you if you stand calmly and firmly at your own center. Be able, as my Guru said, to stand unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds. If you offer your heart's feelings up in devotion to God, fear will pass overhead like a cloud, and you will be enveloped in bliss. This is a beautiful teaching, and Swamiji gives two very brief but very powerful pieces of advice on how to be able to stand unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds. And the crash of breaking worlds is simply, even if this whole world doesn't turn into worldwide calamity, our own worlds at times, they're very stressful. Our lives have ups and downs. There's no avoiding karma coming to each person. Sometimes people ask the question, why is it that bad things seem to happen to good people? And it's a nice sentiment when you hear it. But in fact, bad things happen to everybody at some point in their life. There's no avoiding. All the whole travails in the ups and downs of duality. We're living in a world of duality. And Yogananda G also talked about future calamities, even cataclysms, that would come into the world. And so this advice is on a personal level, the personal ups and downs, crashes of our personal world, but also on a much bigger scale. Now, Swami Kriyananda Ji was once asked a question at a lecture. What is the most important yoga posture? The best of them all. And he thought about it, and he said, very simply, he said, is to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. And so that is the real key, is to learn how to be strong within ourselves, not to depend on anything outside of ourselves. Yes, it's important to have friends and family and support network, but in the end we come into this world alone. We leave this world alone. And in both of those instances, if we can be strong and centered and have a strong center in ourselves, then we can rise above all the ups and downs of life. Now, being strong and firm and centered in ourselves, it doesn't mean being selfish or self-involved or little, because our true inner self, deep in our astral spine, is really happens when we start to expand our awareness from this little self to the vast infinite self. And when we expand this littleness into even unity, union, yoga with the infinite, we start to feel divine bliss. We start to feel like we are underneath the ocean, which has on the very surface all of these crashing waves. But if we can get underneath the surface, the ocean is very, very calm at its depths. And so meditation, practicing the presence of the divine during the day, all the practices of yoga, they help us to go underneath the depths of the crashing ocean waves and get to our true center in ourself. Now, the first sentence in this reading today, Swamiji, he talks one way to do this. He says, no calamity will shake you if you can stand calmly and firmly at your own center. And I would say that a good part of Swami Kriyanandaji's life was spent teaching people how to do this. Because he didn't teach people to go escape into the Himalayas and escape by meditating all day long and avoiding either responsibilities or outward action. No, he taught to have a morning and evening meditation practice, as most of us at Ananda Sangha have. And when you develop that regular practice, it's not just a meditation habit and practice that you're developing. Meditation really is just only a tool to get us to our center. What we're really developing is the habit of coming back to our center very deeply, twice a day, every day. And when we develop that habit over time, it really does become more and more habitual to carry that centeredness throughout daily life and to carry it through all the difficulties in life. And you can see how there are people who can stay very, very calm and centered in the most extreme difficulties and challenges. You will find that if you can do this, you can start to have a real effect on others, a very positive effect on others. It can be a very positive effect on the world. A small example of this, I think I've seen this many times in America at a supermarket. You're shopping and there's a baby that's crying and screaming and getting upset. And I've seen two variations on this theme. One of them, the mother is also very harried and uncentered and emotional and upset and responds emotionally, reactively, and just gets the baby more and more upset. And I've also seen mothers who are very calm, very joyful, very loving. Not that the first mother wasn't, she was just stressed out, but who come from their center more deeply. And they talk to the child, they caress it, they cheer it up, and the child starts to calm down. And so the magnetism that a person has by communing with their higher self and staying strong in themselves actually can have a very powerful and strong effect on external reality. Now, one of the best ways that meditation works with helping us stand calmly is through expansion of our consciousness. When our world is very small and confined by our consciousness being very little, then anything that comes into that very small pool of consciousness has a very big impact. And a good analogy is if you throw a rock into a very small puddle of water, it creates a big commotion and a big splash. Muddy water goes flying everywhere. But if you throw the same rock into the ocean, it just makes a little splash and then goes underneath the surface and is hardly noticed. The difference is not in the karma, the rock, or the outward thing that's happening. The difference is in the vast ocean or the small puddle of consciousness that it enters into. And so when we can change our self-identity from, or expand our self-identity from this little self into the infinite self, then we can stay much, much more calm amidst the crash of breaking worlds. Calmness is very interesting. Peace and calmness are two qualities of the divine, two aspects of God that Yogananda G talked about very often. He talked about 8 aspects of God that came from some scripture, I don't know which one. Peace, calmness, love, bliss, energy, power, wisdom, and sound, and light. I think I actually said 9, but I repeated one. Sound and light are the other 2. And those first 2, peace and calmness, they're always mentioned first. And I think one reason is that peace very often is the very first experience of God. People, I think, for many people, it's an experience watching a sunset or being by the ocean or having an experience in nature. Peace has been described by the great ones more as the absence of motion and restlessness and stress. And so when we get into a beautiful, calm, quiet, natural scene, we start to experience that peace of the divine. Calmness, which sounds like it's almost the same thing, is slightly different. Calmness is more active. And calmness comes, and it can also come when experiencing a sunset, and I think it's part of experiencing the divine in a beautiful sunset going down over the ocean. Calmness is more expansive and more dynamic in a way because our consciousness is expanding. And when our consciousness expands, and what happens is our little self-definition and self-identification start to dissolve in that expansion. And so when we more and more habitually carry around calmness with us, we don't identify so much with the small hurts and pains and upsets that happen throughout the day. Someone, does something while we're driving that is very aggressive and cuts us off, and we can either get very upset or we can laugh about it. And these things happen every day, small ways, big ways. But when our self-identification is not about I, my, me, and mine, but more in the infinite vastness and expansion, then we are not so affected by the ups and downs, by the waves on the surface, because we are calm underneath those waves. Now, there's a very interesting concept that for some reason I've been tuning into lately, which is that the way to divine freedom that Yogananda G talked about, he said that in order to become fully liberated, he said that one must help to free 6 other souls, 6 other people. And it's an interesting concept because it's not like there's a rule book of how to find God and you just have to sort of check off the boxes and, okay, I've helped 1 and I got 5 more to go. It's not like a contract you sign, it's not that particular. But he was particular about this. But when I hear something like this, I always wonder, well, what is the divine principle behind it? Why do you have to help free 6 others in order to reach moksha, is what Yogananda G was saying. What is the divine principle there? Because we can learn from that principle and apply that principle in all of our lives, even though we might not be freeing others, but we might be helping others in that way. We can learn about this principle from something that Swami Kriyananda Ji said. He was in an elevator once, speaking with his guru, Yogananda G. And at one time, Yogananda Ji said that his most advanced woman disciple, Sister Gyanamata, that she had become fully liberated. And she had passed by that time and become fully liberated. And Swamiji was with Yogananda. And the master said that in order to become fully liberated, you must help free 6 others. And Swamiji just had the thought. He didn't even say it, he just had the thought. But this thought came. Sister Gyanamata, he said that she was liberated, but she didn't have disciples. I never saw disciples of hers. And Yogananda Ji actually read Swamiji's thought, and he looked at him and he said, she had disciples. And so what does that mean, to have disciples? She didn't have people sitting at her feet. She never gave a satsang. As far as I know, she never gave a public lecture. What she did do was something that Yogananda Ji said. He said that Sister Gyanamata, the last 20 years of her life, were mostly spent working out an extraordinary amount of physical karma and pain and suffering and just extreme challenges. She almost died a few times. Once Yogananda Ji said that he looked at her life and he scanned over her entire life, this lifetime. He said there was not a sin in the entire life, not even in thought. And then he said that most of the karma that she was working out those last 20 years was the karma of others. And I don't think she looked at 6 others and said, okay, I'm going to help free you and you and you, because she didn't have that sort of relationship with people in such an outward way. But she was taking on the karma to help free other souls. And it could have been many more than 6. It's not like there's a limit to that. And so this is a divine teaching in a way that all of us can learn from, which is that in order to find divine freedom on the deepest sense, but even in our own, wherever we're at, in whatever direction we're going and wherever we're starting, that when we achieve a high degree of selflessness, where we are thinking of giving to others, helping others, even at a great sacrifice to ourselves, it creates an expansion of consciousness. And in that expansion of consciousness, there's a great degree of calmness and a great limiting of being affected by the ups and downs in our personal lives. And in the example of Sister Gyanamata, this was an extreme degree of selflessness. She was willing to take on people's physical karma and work that out in her body and go through a lot of pain and a lot of trauma and again nearly dying a few times. But in our own day-to-day lives, when we can help others in simple ways, in big ways, the more that we can do that, the less our own self-identity becomes contractive and small. And when, again, you'll see that people whose self-identity is contractive and small, every little thing in their life causes a great deal of upheaval. Oh my God, this and this happened. And I've met people like that in my life where they're in an extraordinary amount of consternation over something. And it turns out that it was something that was, I think most of us would think was relatively trivial. But because they identified so much in such a small way, it was a big thing. It was that rock was going into a very small mud puddle and creating a very big commotion. And so meditation, one of the great ways that it helps us to stand calmly and firmly at our center, unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds, is that meditation expands our consciousness away from this little self and into the infinite self. Now, the last sentence that Swamiji gave in this reading today gives the other hint and the other advice about how to achieve the ability to stand calmly and firmly amidst the crash of our daily lives or the crash of breaking worlds. He says, if you offer your heart's feelings up in devotion to God, fear will pass overhead like a cloud, and you will be enveloped in bliss. And here he talks about working with one divine feeling, because calmness can be seen as a dispassionate quality in some ways. But in fact, in order to achieve oneness with God, we have to not only overcome our reactive process, our negative emotions, and the hurts and the pains and the fear that we feel amidst the crash of breaking worlds. It's an emotion. We don't get rid of those emotions by killing them. We transmute them into something much bigger. We turn it into divine emotion, which is divine bliss. And the way that we overcome this reactive mode and these negative reactions to events is through devotion and offering up our heart's feelings. The heart's feelings can be negative, and until we really have divine freedom, there will be negative emotions. There will be fear, there will be jealousy, there will be hurt, all these different things that everyone goes through in life. But when we offer up our heart's feelings and emotions, the good and the bad, and offer them up in devotion to God, what happens is, on the deepest level, on the level of the science of yoga, the energy is lifted up from going down the spine and out through the heart chakra into negative emotions, and that flow is reversed. It comes in deeply to our center and goes up the astral spiritual spine, up to the spiritual eye, in deep devotion and self-offering to God. And when we can do that, then we can experience divine bliss. I had this experience, and I won't go into it, but you can read about it if you have the book Loved and Protected by Nayaswami Asha. She tells very short stories that devotees sent to her of divine experiences they had, of feeling protected and loved by divine grace. And the third story in that book is the one that I sent, and it's a divine experience that I had where I almost drowned in the ocean. And I actually thought I was going to die, and I actually let go and offered myself back to God. I thought, okay, I'm leaving this world now, it's time to go. And Lord, I offer myself completely, without reservation, into your divine self. And these weren't words I was thinking, this was a feeling I was thinking. And I had just started on the path of meditation, just weeks prior to that, of this path. And in that moment of complete devotional offering to God, I felt such overwhelming divine bliss. And as I wrote in that story that's in Asha's book, just a simple, very short sentence, self-offering equals bliss. And by that I mean complete, pure, wholehearted self-offering equals divine bliss. And that's what Swamiji is saying here. If you offer your heart's feelings up in devotion to God, fear will pass overhead like a cloud, and you will be enveloped in bliss. And that, you can almost boil down the entirety of the spiritual path into that single sentence, and learning how to do it. If we can offer ourselves, holding nothing back, and give ourselves with just complete loving attention to the Lord, whatever way we worship God, we will start to experience divine joy. And I think we've all experienced this to varying degrees. I think you will find that when you experience the first glimmerings of divine joy, it's because you have in some way either expanded your consciousness or you offered the little self towards God. Swamiji actually writes that love is the first manifestation of bliss. This is it's almost like an aphorism of Swamiji's. And he only said it once that I ever have read in all of his teachings and his books. Love is the first manifestation of bliss. And that's partly what this sentence says. If with pure devotion you can offer yourself up to the divine, in that self-offering it equals and turns into the deepest divine bliss. I've shared this story before here, and I'll make it brief, but a few years ago I was dealing with a chronic condition that after some years went away, but it was associated with a great deal of pain of the facial nerve. The common name for this condition, of which I had a variant, the common name is called suicide disease because of the intensity, but also the quality, particular quality of this pain. And I could find no way to overcome it and escape from it because it was a nerve pain. You could not take painkillers and affect it, and I couldn't sit up and meditate because I was so nauseous and dizzy and weak and in so much pain. And eventually I found the secret to it, because of course there was concern and there was fear at times that, oh my God, is this going to be the rest of my life that I experience this? And the only answer was to offer myself, as Swamiji says, offering my heart's feelings in devotion to God. And that's what I did. And I was not praying for myself. I was not asking for healing. I was not asking for anything. I just offered myself to Divine Mother in complete, free, devotional self-offering, holding nothing back, and asking for nothing for myself. And when I did that, I felt such an extreme bliss that the pain was still there, interestingly, and this is a real secret. The pain, it wasn't like it went away, but the bliss became more powerful and more attractive and more noticeable. And in that sense, the pain went away because it no longer bothered me or concerned me. And so this is a real secret, because if we can tune into God as divine joy, yes, to some extent it will change the outer circumstances of our lives. And I think eventually maybe it helped to change this condition until it went mostly away, as it has pretty much gone by now. But we can start to affect the outer circumstances of our lives to some extent, not maybe 100%, but just like the calm, loving, centered mother with the baby who's upset affects the consciousness of the child, we can, with our own consciousness and awareness, we can affect outer circumstances. But to the extent that the outer circumstances don't go away, the pain doesn't go away, the suffering doesn't go away, to that extent the divine bliss will be stronger. And so this really is the answer to everything. And this really is the way to overcome the crash of breaking worlds, outwardly but also inwardly, when we're feeling suffering and hurt and pain within ourselves. Swamiji says, relating to all this, he says in his book on the renunciate order for a new age, the Nayaswami order, he talks about the marks of a true renunciate. He has a list of something like 14 or something of them. And one of them that he says, the mark of a true renunciate, he says, they view pleasure and pain equally, as opposite or dual expressions of eternal divine bliss. Now, it sounds like a really nice idea, but it's not easy to view pleasure and pain equally. We enjoy pleasure, we like indulging in pleasure, experiencing it, and we don't like pain. And these are the likes and dislikes that attracts the soul to this dual world that we live in. And so, again, it comes only through meditation, through calmness, through expanding our consciousness, our self-identity, but also transmuting our divine feeling by self-offering and devotion. That's when we start to see the divine bliss behind duality, behind the ups and downs, behind pleasure and pain. And we find that that calm place in the deep ocean underneath the waves is not just a dispassionate calm, it's a blissful calm. It is the bliss of our own true nature. and really is the goal and the ultimate end of everybody, because we came from joy, we came from bliss, and in the end we merge back into that bliss. Now, I'm going to share yesterday's reading from Living Wisely, Living Well, August 30th, because it relates to this and also offers some other advice along the same lines. Swamiji writes, "Face every trial cheerfully. Don't shrink from it, but thrust your chest out and accept the test bravely. Remember, you cannot avoid trouble anyway. Trials are like dogs. If they threaten you, confront them with courage, and they'll run away. But if you yourself run away, they'll give eager chase." And so, this is the way to overcome tests and trials, is not to turn away from them, not to wish they were going away, because they're going to chase you. And when they chase you, they're going to run you down. The way to face them is to turn around, face them with courage, face them with strength, face them with energy. Yogananda G had a saying. He said, "What comes of itself, let it come." And he was talking about karmas and tests and trials. And that's the first step, is to let it come. Then the second step is to face it and to run with it in a way rather than run away from it. There's a poem that I read many, many years ago when I was a child. It was written by the man who wrote the Winnie the Pooh books. And I posted the whole poem on Facebook a couple of days ago. It's a sweet poem and charming poem in some ways. But there's one stanza in there that actually applies to this lesson today in an interesting way. And this poem, the words are, he said, and the author is A.A. Milne, he said, "If you were a bird and lived on high, you'd lean on the wind when the wind came by. You'd say to the wind when it took you away, 'That's where I wanted to go today.'" And it's a very interesting way of looking. When a test comes, see it as the wind. And rather than saying, "Oh, I don't want to do this," well, you're going to have to deal with it anyways. You're going to have to go there no matter what, whether you like it or not. And so when that wind of a test comes, say in an affirmative way, "Yes, that's where I wanted to go today," and run with it and face it and work on it, deal with it. It doesn't mean accepting it passively and not responding to overcome it, but it does mean going with it and saying, "Thank you, Lord, for giving me this test. Thank you for giving me this challenge, because this is my way to freedom, and I know this came from you to help me to develop a certain quality." And so do say, "Lord, yes, this is where I want to go today, and be with me as I go with this test and this challenge." And you'll find that when you face tests and challenges with a great deal of energy and courage, two things happen. One is like the dog that Swamiji said, if you face it and turn it, it will tend to turn away and become smaller. But also the other thing is that you become bigger by putting out that energy, by having the courage, by having that expansion. And so you become bigger, the test becomes smaller. And yes, there may be specific things that you do to act to overcome the test, more, I guess, on a technical level, but really it's more on an energy level that you overcome it, again, by becoming bigger and by your magnetism, the test becoming smaller. And so this is where Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, he said that, talking about the path of yoga, he said that, and Lahiri Mahashaya and Babaji talked about this. Babaji said to Lahiri Mahashaya, first of all, Lahiri asked Babaji about giving Kriya to others. And Babaji essentially said, give it to those who are renounced and renouncers. Lahiri asked Babaji, "Oh, please, we need to share this more widely with householders and others." And that's when Lahiri Mahashaya said yes. He said, "Bestow the Kriya key to all those who are ready. The divine wish has been expressed through you," is what he said to Lahiri. But then, this is at the point when Babaji said, after a silence, Babaji added, "Repeat to each of your disciples this majestic promise from the Bhagavad Gita. Even a little bit of the practice of this religion, Kriya Yoga, will save you from dire fears and colossal sufferings. And so, if you practice Kriya Yoga, practice it in this way, especially that Swamiji said, offering your heartfelt devotion to God along with the energy with Kriya. But also use it with energy, with strength, and you will develop that calm center that Swamiji talked about as the other component from this reading today. So we have been shown the way to overcome the challenges of life, the crash of breaking worlds. And this way is available to all. One doesn't have to be a hermit, a sadhu. These teachings were given by Krishna, by Babaji, to all who are receptive for it, no matter where you live, no matter what style of life you live. And so take these teachings to heart, practice them, live them, and you'll find that there is not any test or challenge that you cannot overcome. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.